Far beyond the seawall of Georgetown, where the Atlantic turns brown with river sediment and the horizon seems almost empty, a floating industrial complex works through the night. It does not stand on land. It rides the ocean more than 100 miles offshore, above water so deep that the seabed lies far beyond the reach of sunlight. Pipes descend into darkness. Crude oil rises from rock hidden beneath the ocean floor. Tankers arrive, load, and leave for refineries on other continents. Behind this operation is a country with fewer than 1 million people. For most of its modern history, Guyana was known outside the region for sugar, bauxite, gold, political struggle, migration, and vast forests that few foreigners had ever seen. Then, in 2015, an offshore well called Liza-1 confirmed a discovery that changed the scale of every national conversation. In less than 5 years, Guyana moved from producing no oil at all to opening one of the most important new petroleum frontiers on Earth. The numbers are almost too large for the country that owns them. More than 8 billion oil-equivalent barrels of recoverable resources are estimated in the Stabroek Block. Production began at the end of 2019. Within 6 years, daily output had climbed to roughly 900,000 barrels, giving Guyana one of the highest rates of petroleum production per person anywhere in the world. Money began moving through the economy at a pace the country had never experienced. Steel and cement crowded the wharves. Roads widened. Bridges rose across brown rivers. Hotels appeared above neighborhoods that had changed slowly for generations. Shore bases worked through the night. Government budgets expanded. Companies arrived looking for contracts, workers, land, offices, and influence. Guyanese living abroad began asking whether it was time to return. But an oil discovery does not simply make a country rich. It makes every old weakness more expensive. It increases the value of good institutions and the cost of bad decisions. It can build schools, hospitals, sea defenses, and industries. It can also raise prices, deepen inequality, weaken other sectors, and concentrate power. It can give a small nation the ability to shape its future while making that future dependent on a resource the world is promising to use less. This is the paradox of Guyana. A country covered by rainforest is becoming an oil power. A nation with one of the smallest populations in South America is managing one of the largest offshore discoveries of its generation. A land that stores immense quantities of carbon in living trees is selling immense quantities of carbon from beneath the sea. And along its low Atlantic coast, where most Guyanese people live, the water is always waiting. To understand what oil could do to Guyana, we first have to understand the country oil has arrived in. Guyana sits on the northeastern shoulder of South America, between Venezuela, Brazil, Suriname, and the Atlantic Ocean. On a map, it belongs unmistakably to the continent. Culturally, however, much of the country looks and sounds toward the Caribbean. English is the official language. Guyanese Creole carries the rhythms of everyday conversation. Cricket matters. Caribbean music moves through minibuses and family gatherings. The country is a member of CARICOM, and Georgetown hosts the organization's headquarters. Yet Guyana is also deeply South American. Its great rivers flow through the Guyana Shield, one of the oldest geological regions on Earth. Its forests connect with the Amazonian world. Jaguars move through its interior. Giant anteaters cross its savannas. Indigenous nations maintain cultural and trading relationships that existed long before modern borders divided the continent. The name Guyana is often understood as a land of many waters, and water defines nearly everything. The Essequibo, Demerara, and Berbice rivers run toward the Atlantic. Smaller rivers divide forest from forest, village from village, and mining district from protected land. In the interior, boats remain roads. Along the coast, canals decide whether rain becomes irrigation or disaster. Most of the population lives on a narrow strip of flat land beside the ocean. In places, this coast lies below the level reached by the sea at high tide. The geography seems impossible until the engineering becomes visible. Sea walls face the Atlantic. Canals run between fields, roads, and houses. Pumps move water when gravity cannot. Sluice gates, known locally as cokers, open when the tide allows fresh water to escape and close when the ocean pushes back. This system did not begin with oil. It is the inheritance of centuries. Dutch colonists, seeking plantation land, built drainage networks and reclaimed coastal ground. British rule expanded the sugar economy and maintained the canals for a society organized around estates. After independence, Guyanese engineers, farmers, drainage workers, and communities inherited a landscape that could never be left unattended. The coast is not simply land. It is a machine that must keep working. When drains clog, pumps fail, rainfall overwhelms the system, or a sea defense breaks, water enters homes and fields with astonishing speed. The floods of 2005 demonstrated the scale of the danger, inundating large parts of the coast and causing losses that reached deeply into the national economy. Climate change makes this old struggle harder. Rising seas increase pressure from the Atlantic. Heavier rainfall can overwhelm drainage. Urban development covers soil that once absorbed water. New roads, housing schemes, warehouses, and industrial sites add value to land that remains exposed. Oil money may help Guyana defend the coast. It may also finance so much construction that the coast becomes even more difficult to protect. Georgetown lives inside this contradiction. The capital is a city of canals, markets, ministries, churches, wooden houses, concrete offices, and traffic that seems to have outgrown the roads. Its name reflects the British colonial period, but its physical structure carries Dutch engineering, African labor, Indian commerce, Portuguese enterprise, Chinese migration, Indigenous presence, and Caribbean adaptation. At Stabroek Market, a great iron clock tower rises above stalls crowded with vegetables, clothing, household goods, gold jewelry, electronics, spices, and people moving in every direction. Buses and taxis compete for space outside. The Demerara River passes nearby, broad and brown, carrying vessels toward the Atlantic. Not far away, colonial-era wooden buildings stand on raised foundations. Ventilation, shutters, steep roofs, verandas, and open space reveal architecture designed for heat and rain. Some structures have been carefully preserved. Others lean, decay, or disappear beneath newer construction. The city's beauty is not polished. It appears in flashes. Morning light on a canal, a painted house behind a flowering tree, children in school uniforms, a cricket match on an open field, vendors cutting fruit beside a road, the seawall filling in the evening with walkers, food sellers, music, and Atlantic wind. For generations, the seawall has been more than infrastructure. It has been public space. People meet there because the edge of danger can also be the edge of freedom. Beyond it lies the ocean. Behind it lies a city protected by concrete earth, mangroves, pumps, gates, and constant maintenance. Now Georgetown is changing. New hotels alter the skyline. Office buildings advertise companies that did not exist locally a decade ago. Apartment rents rise in neighborhoods close to the expanding business districts. Trucks carry steel, cement, machinery, and imported equipment. Skilled workers are in demand. Foreign accents are heard more often. Land that once seemed ordinary becomes speculative. The transformation is visible, but wealth is not experienced through skylines alone. A family measures change through food prices. A teacher measures it through salary and classroom conditions. A patient measures it through the time required to see a doctor. A farmer measures it through drainage, fertilizer, fuel, and access to markets. A young person measures it through the question of whether the best opportunity is finally at home or still somewhere abroad. Guyana's oil story will ultimately be judged at this human scale. The country's national accounts can rise faster than almost anywhere on Earth, while many households still feel insecure. Per-person income can become extremely high on paper because the oil sector produces enormous value with a relatively small workforce. But a statistical average cannot show who owns a home, who has reliable water, who can afford groceries, or who must travel for medical treatment. Oil can transform the number before it transforms the life. That gap is where Guyana's future will be decided. The coast contains most of the country's population, agriculture, roads, government, and business, but it represents only a small part of the land. Travel inland, and Guyana changes almost immediately. The canals and rice fields give way to forest. Roads become thinner, rougher, or disappear. Rivers widen. Settlements grow farther apart. The density of human life falls until the country seems larger than its population can explain. Guyana covers roughly the same area as Great Britain, yet its population is only around 1 million. The national population density is only a few people per square kilometer, and some interior regions have fewer than one person across that same space. This is why the phrase "tiny nation" can be misleading. Guyana is small in population, not in landscape. Its true scale is hidden by trees. The discovery offshore began with geology older than the country itself. For millions of years, sediments carried by giant river systems accumulated along the edge of the continent. Organic material was buried, heated, and transformed. Far beneath the Atlantic, pressure created reservoirs sealed inside layers of rock. Exploration companies had searched the wider region before, often without success. Guyana was considered a frontier basin, promising enough to investigate, uncertain enough to frighten away easy money. Wells were expensive. Water depths were extreme. The commercial system required to produce oil did not exist. Then the Liza-1 well found a thick column of high-quality oil-bearing sandstone in 2015. The discovery did not remain alone. More wells followed in the Stabroek Block, and more discoveries were announced. Liza became the beginning of a chain that included fields with names such as Payara, Yellowtail, Uaru, and Whiptail. The ExxonMobil-led consortium designed production around floating production, storage, and offloading vessels, known as FPSOs. An FPSO is part factory, part storage terminal, and part ship. Oil and gas rise from wells on the seabed through pipes called risers. On the vessel, fluids are separated and processed. Oil is stored inside the hull until a tanker arrives to carry it away. Gas can be re-injected, used, or managed according to the project design. The entire operation takes place far from most citizens, beyond the visible horizon. This distance creates a strange national reality. Guyana's most valuable industry is almost invisible from Guyana. There are no giant oil fields spreading across the coast. There are no forests of pumpjacks beside villages. The resource is extracted offshore by specialized vessels, underwater systems, helicopters, supply ships, digital control rooms, and an international workforce. The money comes ashore more easily than the industry does. That is why local content became a central issue. Guyanese businesses wanted contracts. Workers wanted training. The government introduced requirements intended to reserve or expand participation in certain categories of work. Warehouses, shore bases, transport companies, catering firms, engineering services, security providers, environmental consultants, and professional offices began connecting the offshore economy to the land. But deepwater petroleum remains technologically demanding. Many of its highest value services require experience, equipment, financing, and certifications that cannot be created overnight. This produces another gap. A country may own the resource without yet possessing all the skills required to develop it. Foreign expertise can accelerate production, but dependence can persist if training remains shallow. Local participation can create opportunity, but it can also become a political slogan unless contracts are transparent and companies build real capacity rather than simply adding a local name to an imported operation. The speed of development makes this harder. Guyana went from discovery to production in less than 5 years. That pace was celebrated as an engineering and commercial achievement. It also meant that laws, regulators, environmental systems, financial institutions, universities, and public agencies had very little time to prepare. A large oil state can absorb mistakes across many ministries and industries. A small state can be reshaped by a single contract. The production sharing agreement governing the Stabroek Block has therefore become one of the most debated documents in Guyana. Its basic arithmetic is easy to repeat. In a year when the full ceiling is required, as much as 75% of petroleum production may be used to recover eligible exploration, development, and operating costs. The oil remaining after cost recovery is treated as profit oil and divided equally between the state and the consortium. Guyana also receives a royalty equal to 2% of gross petroleum sales. That structure explains why critics often describe the original agreement as unusually generous to the investors. When the full cost recovery ceiling is used, the government's simple headline share begins with half of the remaining quarter, plus the royalty. But the amount Guyana ultimately receives changes as costs are audited and recovered, production rises, prices move, and projects mature. Supporters of the agreement point back to the moment when it was signed. Commercial oil had not yet been proven. Deepwater exploration was expensive, failure was possible, and Guyana had little leverage in a frontier basin. Critics point forward to what was discovered afterward. Once field after field confirmed a resource of extraordinary scale, terms negotiated under uncertainty began to look very different. Both truths can exist at once. The first company to drill a frontier basin accepts the risk of finding nothing. A country that later discovers a giant resource still has the right to ask whether every recoverable cost is justified, whether audits are timely, whether environmental liabilities are covered, and whether future projects should be governed by stronger terms. The legal question is not the same as the political question. A government may treat the agreement as binding, and fear that forced renegotiation would damage investor confidence. Citizens may still believe that a national fortune deserves harder scrutiny. Guyana has adopted different fiscal terms for future petroleum blocks. The original Stabroek Agreement, however, remains the engine of the existing boom. The percentages matter, but they are not the whole story. The value Guyana receives depends on production, oil prices, project costs, cost recovery, royalties, profit sharing, audits, environmental obligations, and what the state does with every dollar after it arrives. A strong contract can be wasted by weak government. A weaker contract can still finance lasting progress if revenue is transparent, carefully invested, and protected from private capture. The contract matters. The institutions standing behind it matter just as much. To manage petroleum income, Guyana created the Natural Resource Fund, a sovereign wealth fund held through the central bank. Oil revenues enter the fund, and withdrawals move through the national budget under rules intended to make the money visible and limit arbitrary spending. The fund must answer two urgent demands that pull in opposite directions. One demand comes from the future: save enough that citizens born after the offshore fields decline still inherit something valuable. The other comes from the present: repair drainage, strengthen sea defenses, improve hospitals, educate children, reduce energy costs, and connect communities that have waited for development through generations of scarcity. Save too much, and oil wealth becomes an impressive account balance beside preventable hardship. Spend too quickly, and money can outrun the country's ability to use it well. That race is already visible on the coast. At the wharves, imported steel, machinery, vehicles, and cement move inland. Construction trucks meet minibuses on streets never designed for this volume. Surveyors mark new housing schemes. Cranes rise near the Demerara. Contractors search for welders, electricians, engineers, machine operators, accountants, and inspectors all at once. The government has chosen rapid public investment. Roads, bridges, housing, drainage, schools, health facilities, energy projects, and public services have received budgets that would once have been unimaginable. The logic is compelling. Turn petroleum extracted beneath the Atlantic into assets that remain on land. But construction has physical limits. There are only so many experienced project managers, skilled tradespeople, laboratories, ports, inspectors, and public agencies available. Money can be transferred in seconds. Concrete still needs time to cure. Engineers still need time to check a design. A hospital still needs trained people long after the building is opened. When spending expands faster than capacity, prices rise, supervision weakens, and the pressure to accept poor work becomes greater. A bridge planned carefully can connect generations. A bridge rushed for political effect can become an expensive repair. The same is true of roads without drainage, schools without teachers, clinics without medicine, and housing schemes without reliable water, transport, or employment nearby. Development is not measured by the number of ribbons cut. It is measured by systems that still work when the cameras leave. The risks appear in ordinary transactions. When construction firms compete for the same workers, wages in some trades rise, while farms and smaller businesses struggle to keep staff. When companies and government compete for land, rents and property prices climb. Owners gain, tenants fall behind. When private employers offer salaries public agencies cannot match, engineers, nurses, teachers, and technical staff become harder for the state to retain. The nation can gain money and lose capacity at the same time. Economists call one version of this danger Dutch disease. A resource boom increases spending power and can make other exports less competitive. Labor, credit, and political attention move toward petroleum. Agriculture and manufacturing become harder to sustain. The economy grows larger while becoming more dependent on the source of that growth. Guyana was already vulnerable to concentration before oil. Gold, rice, sugar, bauxite, timber, and seafood all depended on world prices, weather, technology, and access to distant markets. Petroleum does not automatically diversify that economy. It can make the old problem narrower on a much larger scale. The investments that matter most may therefore be the ones that do not look like oil. A reliable electrical grid can lower the cost of every workshop, farm, hotel, hospital, and technology company. Better schools can produce engineers, nurses, coders, teachers, technicians, researchers, and entrepreneurs. Modern ports, cold storage, drainage, and roads can connect farmers and fishers to Caribbean markets. Digital public systems can improve taxation, procurement, land records, and the ability of citizens to follow public money. Universities and vocational programs can turn temporary extraction into permanent skill. This is the difference between spending oil money and converting oil wealth. One creates activity, the other creates options. The national ambition is larger than petroleum. Guyana imagines itself as a regional center for energy, food production, logistics, services, tourism, and manufacturing. The country has land, fresh water, access to Caribbean markets, mineral resources, and a strategic Atlantic position. It also has a small domestic market, difficult interior transport, a long history of expensive electricity, decades of skilled migration, and public institutions facing workloads far beyond those for which they were built. Oil can remove the excuse of insufficient money. It cannot remove the difficulty of execution. That is why the boom looks different depending on where a person stands. At a Georgetown construction site, it looks like cranes, dust, and overtime. At a government office, it looks like procurement files stacked faster than they can be reviewed. At a village shop, it looks like customers with more cash and suppliers charging more. At a school, it may look like a new building with too few experienced teachers. At a family table, it may look like national wealth discussed beside a grocery bill that keeps rising. Many Guyanese have heard promises of transformation before. They have watched industries expand and contract, political campaigns announce new beginnings, and relatives leave for New York, Toronto, London, Barbados, Suriname, Trinidad, and elsewhere. Oil has raised expectations because its scale is impossible to ignore. When citizens hear about billions of barrels, every pothole becomes more insulting. Every drug shortage becomes less acceptable. Every flood becomes evidence of delay. Every contract becomes a test of ownership. Oil does not reduce political pressure. It multiplies it. Yet the greatest wealth visible from space is not offshore. It is green. Forests cover most of Guyana, stretching across the interior in an immense living system of rivers, mountains, wetlands, and canopy. From above, settlements appear as tiny clearings. Roads cut short lines into a landscape that seems almost continuous. This forest is part of the Guyana Shield, a region shared with Venezuela, Suriname, French Guyana, Brazil, and Colombia. Its rocks are ancient. Some formations are billions of years old. Erosion has shaped sandstone plateaus, cliffs, and isolated mountains that rise above the forest like islands. These high tablelands inspired stories of lost worlds because their summits can contain species separated from the lowlands below. Clouds gather around their walls. Water falls from their edges. Rivers begin in places that remain difficult to reach even now. The most famous expression of this landscape is Kaieteur Falls. The Potaro River moves through forest and then drops more than 200 meters in a single powerful fall. There is no city around it, no chain of towers, and no engineered viewing district. The water disappears into mist and gorge, while the surrounding plateau remains covered in green. Kaieteur is often described through comparisons with other waterfalls, but comparisons make it smaller. Its power comes from isolation. A small aircraft crosses hours of forest. The river appears. The ground opens. For a few moments, the scale of Guyana becomes understandable. The country is not empty. It is full of life that human settlement has not yet replaced. Near the falls, tiny golden frogs live inside giant bromeliads. Swifts nest behind the falling water. The forest holds harpy eagles, macaws, monkeys, tapirs, jaguars, and countless insects, plants, fungi, and microorganisms that remain poorly studied. Farther south, the forest opens into the Rupununi savannas. The change is dramatic. Grasslands spread beneath distant mountains. Cattle ranches occupy parts of the landscape. Villages connect by dirt road, river, trail, and small aircraft. During the dry season, dust rises. During the rains, rivers overflow and wetlands expand, linking basins in ways that allow fish and other species to move across enormous distances. Here, giant anteaters walk through tall grass. Jabiru storks stand above flooded plains. Black caimans rest in dark water. Giant river otters hunt in family groups. Arapaima, among the world's largest freshwater fish, move through lakes and channels. The Rupununi is not a wilderness without people. Indigenous communities have shaped, used, named, burned, cultivated, hunted, fished, and protected this landscape for generations. Ranching families have also developed a distinct culture of horses, cattle, leatherwork, rodeos, and long-distance travel across the savannah. Guyana's interior is frequently marketed as untouched. That word is attractive to tourism and dangerous to history. A landscape can remain ecologically rich without being untouched. The absence of cities does not mean the absence of ownership, memory, law, conflict, or care. Rivers have names. Hills have stories. Fishing grounds have rules. Forest trails connect families and communities. Sacred places may be invisible to a visitor and central to the people who live there. Guyana officially recognizes 9 indigenous peoples or nations: the Akawayo, Arekuna, Lokono, Karinya, Makushi, Batamona, Waiwai, Wapichan, and Warao. Their languages belong to different families. Their territories extend across regions now divided by international borders. Their communities range from settlements connected by road to remote villages reached primarily by river or aircraft. Indigenous people make up a significant share of the population and form majorities in parts of the hinterland. Yet access to healthcare, secondary education, communications, reliable energy, and economic opportunity remains uneven. Distance explains some of this inequality. Politics explains more. A clinic in the interior may need medicine delivered by boat or plane. A child may leave home to attend secondary school. Internet service can transform education and emergency communication, but equipment and maintenance remain difficult. Mining can create cash income while bringing pollution, alcohol abuse, disease, conflict, and pressure on traditional land. Land rights are therefore not an abstract issue. They determine whether a community can decide what happens to the forest around it. Guyana's Amerindian Act provides a legal framework for village governance and titled land, and national programs have continued the process of demarcation and extension. But disagreements remain over the adequacy of consultation, the recognition of customary territories, control of subsoil resources, mining concessions, and how communities participate in decisions made far away. Oil has added another layer to this debate. The wells are offshore, but the national development they finance will reach the interior. Roads may reduce isolation and improve access to markets, schools, and hospitals. They may also open forests to logging, mining, settlement, and land speculation. Electricity and internet can strengthen a village. They can also make outside pressure arrive faster. The question is not whether indigenous communities should remain frozen in an imagined past. People everywhere have the right to choose education, technology, mobility, income, and modern services. The question is, who controls the speed and direction of change? Guyana's forests are also central to its climate policy. Long before the first oil flowed, the country developed a low-carbon development strategy built on a simple argument. Forests provide a global service by storing carbon, protecting biodiversity, regulating water, and remaining standing. Yet forest nations are rarely paid enough for that service. Guyana worked with Norway on performance-based forest finance and built systems to monitor deforestation. It later entered carbon markets, selling verified credits intended to place economic value on maintaining forest cover. A share of carbon credit revenue has been directed toward village-led development plans in indigenous communities. This approach has gained international attention. It also attracts difficult questions. How is the value of a forest measured? Would the forest truly have been cut without the payment? Who verifies the avoided emissions? How much revenue reaches the communities that protect the land? Can a country claim climate leadership through forests while rapidly expanding oil production whose emissions will occur when the fuel is burned elsewhere? Guyana's answer is that responsibility must include history and fairness. The country contributed very little to the accumulation of greenhouse gases that created the climate crisis. Wealthy states built industries through centuries of coal, oil, gas, land clearing, and consumption. Guyana preserved most of its forest and still faces rising seas that threaten its populated coast. From this perspective, asking Guyana to leave its petroleum undeveloped while rich countries continue consuming fossil fuels can sound less like climate justice and more like another demand that a small developing country sacrifice wealth for a global system it did not create. Critics respond that new oil production still adds carbon to a warming world, regardless of where combustion occurs. Forest carbon and fossil carbon are not interchangeable. Trees cycle carbon through living systems. Petroleum brings ancient carbon into the atmosphere. Protecting one does not erase the effect of extracting the other. This is not a contradiction Guyana can solve alone. The world wants oil and condemns oil. It wants forests protected, but rarely pays forest countries enough to compete with extraction. It tells developing nations to leap toward clean energy, while richer consumers continue to demand cheap fuel, air travel, plastics, shipping, and industrial growth. Guyana has entered this argument at the exact moment when the old energy system remains powerful and its long-term legitimacy is collapsing. The country's official strategy is to use petroleum revenues to build a more resilient, diversified, and low-carbon society. Investments in solar energy, transmission, flood protection, and other infrastructure form part of that vision. Natural gas brought ashore from offshore production is also intended to reduce the cost and pollution of electricity compared with older fuel oil generation. The promise is a transition financed by the resource being transitioned away from. The risk is that petroleum infrastructure creates dependence instead. Oil fields have operating lives. Gas systems require customers. Government budgets become accustomed to revenue. Businesses invest around extraction. Political leaders gain popularity through spending. The incentive to approve another project becomes stronger because the economy has adapted to the previous one. A bridge can lead away from oil. It can also lead deeper into it. The forest faces more immediate pressures as well. Gold mining has shaped Guyana for generations. In the interior, small and medium-scale operations provide income to miners, transporters, shopkeepers, mechanics, cooks, and communities. Gold is portable, valuable, and accessible in places where few other cash industries exist. But mining can tear open riverbanks, remove forest, and release sediment into water. Mercury used in some forms of gold recovery can threaten ecosystems and human health. Informal operations are difficult to regulate. Abandoned pits remain dangerous. Roads created for mining invite further clearing. The industry is not easily divided into heroes and villains. A miner may be supporting a family in a region with few alternatives. An indigenous community may depend on mining income while also suffering from polluted water. A government may need export revenue while struggling to monitor thousands of operations across immense terrain. Conservation that ignores livelihoods will fail. Mining that ignores ecological limits will destroy the conditions that make life possible. In places such as Iwokrama, Guyana has experimented with another model. The Iwokrama forest was established as a site for research, conservation, and sustainable use in partnership with local communities. Scientists study biodiversity, visitors travel through canopy and river habitats. Community tourism creates income linked to keeping ecosystems alive. Elsewhere in the Rupununi, local conservation programs have helped protect arapaima, giant river turtles, and other species while supporting guides, researchers, and village enterprises. These projects are small compared with oil. That may be precisely why they matter. Petroleum creates enormous revenue from a concentrated offshore system. Nature-based tourism and conservation distribute smaller amounts of money across landscapes and communities. They cannot replace oil income at the national level, but they can build local ownership, reward knowledge, and create reasons for wildlife and forests to remain. Guyana's tourism identity is not mass tourism. There are no endless resort coasts or giant cruise districts. Travel can be expensive and logistically difficult. Flights are limited. Interior lodges may require aircraft, boat, four-wheel drive, or long overland journeys. Rain, river level, and road conditions shape every itinerary. But the difficulty protects the experience. A traveler may watch hundreds of parrots gather at dawn, follow jaguar tracks, cross a suspension bridge through the canopy, sit beside a blackwater river, or listen as a local guide identifies birds hidden far above. The guide is not simply pointing at nature. The guide is translating a world. Oil can finance better transport and make these places more accessible. Too much access can damage what visitors came to see. The future of Guyana's interior therefore depends on restraint as much as investment. Not every road should be built in the same way. Not every mineral deposit should be opened. Not every river should become an industrial corridor. Not every forest needs to produce immediate cash. A country that has suddenly gained wealth also gains the ability to leave some things alone. To understand why questions of land, labor, wealth, and distribution carry so much force in Guyana, we have to return to the coast before oil, before independence, and before the country was called Guyana. Indigenous peoples lived across the region long before European ships arrived. They navigated rivers, farmed, hunted, fished, traded, and built political relationships across a landscape Europeans would later divide into colonies. Spanish explorers claimed broad territories without establishing the same level of settlement that developed elsewhere. Dutch traders and colonists moved into the river systems and created colonies along the Essequibo, Berbice, and Demerara. The coast was wet, fertile, and difficult. To turn it into plantation land, colonists built canals, dikes, sluices, and drainage works. But the transformation depended on something far more brutal than engineering. It depended on enslaved African labor. People taken from Africa were forced to clear land, dig canals, build defenses, plant and cut sugarcane, and sustain an economy designed for owners and merchants across the Atlantic. The neat lines of the coastal landscape were created through violence. Every canal has a history beneath the water. Resistance was constant. Enslaved people slowed work, escaped, preserved culture, sabotaged property, negotiated, and rebelled. In 1763, a major uprising began in the Dutch colony of Berbice. Led by figures including Cuffy, the rebellion spread across plantations and for months threatened colonial control. Cuffy became a national symbol because the revolt was not a request for kinder slavery. It was a struggle for power and freedom. Another major rebellion erupted in Demerara in 1823. Thousands of enslaved people participated. The colonial response was violent, and many were killed or executed. News of the uprising and its suppression strengthened the wider movement against slavery in the British Empire. Emancipation came in stages during the 1830s, but freedom did not erase the plantation economy. Estate owners needed labor and sought new workers through indenture. Beginning in the 19th century, large numbers of Indians crossed the ocean under contracts that promised wages and return passage, but often placed them inside harsh, unequal systems. Most came from northern India, with others from the south. They brought languages, religions, foods, music, agricultural knowledge, and family traditions that would become inseparable from Guyana. Hindu temples and Muslim mosques appeared along the coast. Rice cultivation expanded. Roti, curry, dal, fuluri, sweetmeats, and spices entered a national cuisine that was already being shaped by African, Indigenous, and European influences. Portuguese migrants, many from Madeira, arrived and became important in commerce, trade, and the development of a Catholic community. Chinese indentured workers and migrants also became part of the colonial population, with many later moving into retail and business. The result was not a simple melting pot. Communities preserved distinct identities while sharing streets, markets, schools, workplaces, foods, music, and political space. Cooperation grew. So did competition. Colonial institutions often organized labor, residence, and representation in ways that hardened difference. Modern Guyana was created from this complex society. Afro-Guyanese families carried the legacy of enslavement, village building, public service, urban labor, religion, and cultural survival. Indo-Guyanese families carried the legacy of indenture, plantation work, rice farming, commerce, faith, and rural community. Indigenous peoples continued defending territories that colonial maps treated as available land. Mixed heritage families reflected generations of encounter. Portuguese and Chinese Guyanese helped shape business and urban life. New migrants later arrived from the Caribbean, Brazil, Venezuela, and elsewhere. No single group owns the national story, but politics has often been organized as though the country must choose between them. In the 20th century, the movement for self-government produced leaders who initially joined across ethnic lines. Cheddi Jagan, Janet Jagan, Forbes Burnham, and others helped create a mass political challenge to colonial rule. The alliance did not hold. Ideological conflict, personal rivalry, ethnic mobilization, labor competition, and Cold War intervention divided the movement. Jagan's support became associated largely, though never exclusively, with Indo-Guyanese voters. Burnham's support became associated largely, though never exclusively, with Afro-Guyanese voters. Foreign powers feared Jagan's leftist politics. Britain suspended the constitution in the 1950s, and the United States later supported efforts to prevent his return to power during the Cold War. Guyana moved toward independence inside this atmosphere of strikes, unrest, distrust, and external interference. The country became independent in 1966 and a republic in 1970 under Forbes Burnham's leadership. Independence brought pride, but not political peace. Burnham promoted cooperative socialism, nationalized major industries, and attempted to build national control over the economy. Supporters remember efforts to expand sovereignty, education, infrastructure, and cultural confidence. Critics remember authoritarian rule, electoral manipulation, restrictions, shortages, and economic decline. Both memories remain active. In the 1970s and 1980s, many Guyanese left. Professionals, tradespeople, families, and young people built new lives abroad. Migration became a national survival strategy. A relative overseas could send money, barrels of goods, school supplies, medicine, clothing, and the possibility of sponsorship. The diaspora grew so large that Guyana began existing beyond its borders. There is a Guyanese Georgetown in memory, but there are also Guyanese neighborhoods in Queens, Brooklyn, Toronto, London, and cities across the Caribbean. Families learned to live through phone calls, visits, remittances, and long absences. Children grew up knowing a country through food, accents, stories, and summer trips. Grandparents raised grandchildren, while parents worked abroad. Doctors and nurses trained in Guyana and served health systems elsewhere. Teachers left classrooms that had helped educate them. This loss of skill weakened institutions, but diaspora networks also provided capital, knowledge, political influence, and support during hardship. Now oil has reversed the emotional direction of the question. For decades, Guyanese asked how to leave. A growing number are asking how to return. Return is not simple. Salaries may be higher in New York or Toronto. Public services remain uneven. Housing costs have risen. Business culture can be difficult to navigate. People who left may be viewed as outsiders when they come back with plans and opinions. But the possibility itself is new. A country once defined by brain drain may be able to attract its own experience home. Political change came in 1992, when elections widely accepted as free and fair returned Chedi Jagan and the People's Progressive Party to office. Yet democratic competition did not dissolve ethnic mistrust. Election seasons remained tense, parties changed leaders, coalitions formed, and the distribution of state resources remained central to political argument. The 2020 election produced a prolonged dispute after votes were cast, leading to recounts, court cases, international pressure, and a delayed transfer of power. Oil had already begun flowing. The struggle over government was therefore no longer only about managing a small, vulnerable economy. It was about control during the arrival of unprecedented wealth. This is one reason transparency matters so deeply. In a society where political support has often followed ethnic patterns, citizens may fear that contracts, jobs, land, public works, and cash programs will be distributed through loyalty rather than need. A road is never only a road when people suspect it was built for one community and denied to another. A scholarship is never only a scholarship when access feels political. An oil fund is never only a financial account when control of the state is contested. Guyana's challenge is not to erase identity. It is to prevent identity from deciding who belongs to the future. Daily life already contains more cultural mixing than political maps suggest. A table may hold pepper pot with bread, cook-up rice, curry, fried fish, cassava, chow mein, black cake, and homemade drinks shaped by several histories at once. Pepper pot carries indigenous roots, especially through cassareep, the dark cassava-based liquid that preserves and flavors the meat. Cook-up rice combines rice, peas, coconut milk, meat, and seasoning in a dish of resourcefulness and celebration. Metemji brings ground provisions, dumplings, coconut milk, and African-Caribbean memory. Roti and curry connect Guyana to the Indian diaspora while tasting distinctly Guyanese. Demerara sugar carries the name of a river and the history of plantation wealth. Demerara rum carries that history into bottles known around the world. Food does not resolve injustice, but it records survival. Religious calendars also shape the national year. Christmas lights appear beside Hindu diyas. Fagua covers faces and clothing in color. Eid brings prayer, charity, and family meals. Mashramani fills the streets with costumes, music, and celebration on Republic Day. Emancipation observances honor African freedom and culture. Arrival Day recognizes the history of indentured migrants, especially those from India. Amerindian Heritage Month brings attention to indigenous food, dance, craft, language, and political issues, though culture should never be reduced to festival display. In Guyana, different histories do not take turns. They live beside one another. music moves through the same complexity. Calypso, soca, chutney, reggae, dancehall, gospel, Indian devotional traditions, African drumming, indigenous songs, and modern global styles all circulate. A wedding may carry sounds from several continents. A minibus may become a moving sound system. A church service may be quiet in one neighborhood and explosive with song in another. And then there is cricket. The game arrived through empire and became a language of regional pride. Guyanese players have represented the West Indies with distinction, turning a colonial sport into a stage on which small Caribbean societies could defeat larger powers. Names such as Rohan Kanhai, Clive Lloyd, Shivnarine Chanderpaul, and others carry national meaning far beyond statistics. Cricket grounds become places where class, ethnicity, village, region, and generation briefly share the same tension. Sport cannot permanently unite a nation, but it can reveal that unity is possible. The same is true of language. Formal English governs law, education, and official communication. Guyanese Creole, often called Creolese, carries intimacy, humor, rhythm, and social truth. It can shift from light teasing to sharp political commentary within a sentence. For years, colonial attitudes treated Creole speech as broken English. Linguistic research recognizes it as a structured language variety with its own patterns and history. The difference matters. A people become easier to dismiss when the way they speak is treated as a mistake. Guyana's oil era will introduce more outside voices into this linguistic world. Corporate English, technical petroleum language, legal terminology, international finance, engineering jargon, and the vocabulary of consultants. The country must learn these languages without allowing them to replace its own. Because the most dangerous sentence in a resource boom may be the one ordinary citizens are told they are not qualified to understand. The language of ownership becomes even more important west of the Essequibo River. The Essequibo is Guyana's largest river, a vast waterway filled with islands and fed by tributaries that descend from the interior. West of it lies the region commonly called Essequibo, covering more than half of Guyana's territory. Venezuela claims this land. To Guyanese citizens, it is not an empty space on a disputed map. It contains villages, forests, mining areas, rivers, farms, protected landscapes, indigenous territories, and generations of life under Guyanese administration. The roots of the controversy reach into colonial boundary making. In 1899, an international arbitral tribunal issued an award establishing the boundary between British Guyana and Venezuela. Guyana considers that award final and legally binding. Venezuela later argued that the award was invalid. In 1966, shortly before Guyana became independent, Venezuela and the United Kingdom signed the Geneva Agreement, with British Guyana participating, to seek a resolution to the controversy created by Venezuela's contention. Decades of diplomatic processes did not settle the issue. The matter eventually reached the International Court of Justice, where Guyana seeks confirmation that the 1899 award is valid and binding. Venezuela disputes that position and continues to assert its claim. The court has issued provisional measures, and the case remains before it without a final judgment on the merits resolving the controversy. Oil raised the stakes. The most important offshore discoveries lie in waters connected to Guyana's Atlantic territory. As production expanded, an old boundary dispute became entangled with energy, security, nationalism, and global business. That creates a dangerous temptation. Maps can become emotional weapons. Citizens can be encouraged to see people across the border as enemies. Military gestures can replace patient diplomacy. A dispute inherited from colonial empires can be used to create new fear between modern societies. Guyana has the right to security and to the peaceful administration of the territory it governs. Venezuela advances its own historical and legal case. The responsible path is the one that keeps the controversy within international law and prevents ordinary people from paying for political escalation. The communities of Essequibo should never be reduced to symbols. They are people who need schools, clinics, transport, communications, land security, opportunity, and peace. Their future is larger than a colored shape shown on television. The controversy also reveals a broader truth about sudden wealth. Oil attracts power. International companies arrive with technology and capital. Banks arrive with loans. Construction firms arrive with proposals. Foreign governments arrive with strategic interests. Consultants arrive, speaking the language of urgency. Many will offer something Guyana genuinely needs. Some will also understand that a small government managing enormous projects at extraordinary speed can be easier to influence. Sovereignty in the oil age is therefore more than control of territory. It is the ability to choose without being rushed. To reject debt built on the assumption that oil prices will remain high forever. To stop a project that cannot survive independent environmental review. To refuse infrastructure designed for prestige rather than public need. To demand technology transfer instead of permanent dependence. To train Guyanese professionals who can challenge corporate expertise rather than merely receive it. And to save enough that citizens born after the final profitable barrel are not left with the bill for someone else's prosperity. The central question is not whether Guyana should become rich. It is what kind of richness the country wants. An economy can be rich in exports and poor in capability. A government can be rich in revenue and poor in trust. A city can be rich in new buildings and poor in public space. A nation can be rich in statistics and poor in time, safety, health, education, and belonging. Real transformation moves more slowly than petroleum. A child entering school today may graduate into an economy completely different from the one their parents knew. The quality of that education will determine whether the child becomes an owner, engineer, researcher, manager, entrepreneur, teacher, or only a spectator to the boom. A patient in a new hospital needs trained staff, medicine, maintenance, records, electricity, and trust, not only a modern building. A farmer needs drainage, storage, transport, research, affordable inputs, and stable markets, not only a speech about food security. An indigenous village needs the authority to choose its development, not only projects selected in Georgetown. A young business needs fair access to credit and contracts, not a system in which opportunity follows political connections. This is how oil becomes a society. Guyana begins this test with several advantages. It has competitive elections, an active press and civil society, a large and experienced diaspora, a sovereign wealth fund created near the beginning of production, and natural assets extending far beyond petroleum. It also begins with deep political mistrust, limited administrative capacity, vulnerable infrastructure, and a history in which state resources have often been viewed through the lens of ethnic competition. The resource curse is no longer a mystery. its patterns have appeared across continents. Revenue disappears through corruption. Governments borrow against optimistic forecasts. Public jobs become political rewards. Currency pressure weakens farms and factories. Communities near extraction remain poor. When prices fall, systems built on permanent abundance begin to crack. Knowing the pattern does not guarantee escape. It only removes the excuse of surprise. Guyana also sees the environmental limit more clearly than many petroleum states. Its capital is defended from the Atlantic by infrastructure that must work every day. Floodwater can enter streets and fields long before climate change feels like an abstract global debate. The country's forest strategy shows that Guyana understands the value of a long horizon. Its petroleum strategy must serve the same horizon. That means budgets able to survive lower oil revenue, contracts and audits ordinary citizens can examine, regulators strong enough to challenge global corporations, procurement based on quality, and institutions that remain credible when political power changes hands. This last requirement may be the hardest. Oil encourages leaders to imagine permanence. Democracy requires them to prepare for replacement. Across Guyana, the possibility of success is not theoretical. A new bridge can remove hours from a journey. Modern drainage can protect a rice field and the family depending on it. Reliable electricity can keep a workshop open after sunset. A scholarship can bring a geologist, nurse, pilot, or engineer home. A digital connection can place a specialist inside a remote clinic without moving the patient. Better airports and carefully managed tourism can bring visitors into the forest without turning the forest into a resort. Improved ports and storage can help Guyanese food reach Caribbean islands that import much of what they eat. None of this is fantasy. The revenue exists. The question is whether the systems will. There is also a danger in judging Guyana too early. Oil production is still young. Infrastructure takes years. Education takes a generation. Institutions become stronger through repeated tests, not a single budget. The country is attempting a transformation that would challenge a state many times its size. Criticism is necessary, but cynicism can become lazy. Not every road is corruption. Not every public program is patronage. Not every foreign company is exploitation. Not every environmental concern is hostility to development. Guyana deserves a more demanding form of attention, one that recognizes progress, investigates power, and refuses both celebration without evidence and failure without patience. This is not a blank country waiting for oil to give it a story. Guyana has already survived plantation slavery, indenture, colonial rule, rebellion, foreign intervention, authoritarianism, economic crisis, migration, and political division. Its people understand uncertainty. They also understand endurance. Before dawn on the coast, drainage workers check pumps and gates, fishermen prepare boats, market vendors arrange produce, minibuses begin their routes, children dress for school. In government offices, engineers study plans worth sums that would once have seemed impossible. Offshore, crews monitor wells producing wealth from darkness. Far inland, another morning begins without any view of the Atlantic industry. Mist rises from the forest. A macaw crosses the river. A teacher opens a classroom in an indigenous village. A rancher rides into the Rupununi grassland. A miner starts an engine. At Kaieteur, the Potaro River reaches the edge and falls, as it has for thousands of years, indifferent to budgets, contracts, elections, and oil prices. These worlds belong to the same nation. The coast and the forest, the seawall and the waterfall, the tanker and the canoe, the oil fund and the village account, the promise of rapid wealth, and the older knowledge that survival requires patience. One day, the offshore fields will decline. Every oil province does. The floating vessels will leave. The wells will be sealed. Global demand may change. Prices may fall. New technology may replace part of the market. The exact timing is uncertain, but the ending is not. When that day comes, Guyana will discover what it truly produced. If the boom leaves only roads that cannot be maintained, imported luxury, political fortunes, and an economy waiting for another resource, then the giant discovery will have made the country larger on paper and smaller in possibility. If it leaves healthy citizens, skilled institutions, protected forests, resilient coasts, productive farms, reliable energy, competitive businesses, and communities able to shape their own future, then petroleum will have become something more lasting than petroleum. This is why Guyana's greatest fortune is not the billions of oil-equivalent barrels beneath the Atlantic. It is the brief period in which those barrels give the country unusual freedom to choose. Few nations receive such a moment. Fewer recognize it while it is happening. At night, the production vessel continues working beyond the horizon. From Georgetown, no flame or steel is visible. Only the dark ocean, the wind, and the wall holding back the tide. The wealth is out there. The future